Believe me, it's better for you if I read. So I will try to keep myself to the 10 minutes, although I thought I had 15, so it's a challenge for me. Well, the invitation to explore the conditions for a dialogically born culture is framed in the context of advancing the global commons and shaping a global community. And it is thus inspired by the ethical conviction that we are all in the same boat, and we all should work together to keep it afloat. The question I seek to answer here pertains to the kind of education that would foster this culture. The Western approach to education is commonly described as taking inspiration from the Latin words educare and educere, giving shape from outside or leading out, to characterize its twofold approach to education. One that emphasizes the passing down of knowledge and cultural traditions, and another that emphasizes preparing younger generations for the cultural changes that lie ahead. Of course, these objectives need not be opposed. After all, the vitality of any cultural tradition lies in its ability to enable people to confront unexpected changes. One could ask whether the cultural traditions articulated around the phase of human history that Karl Jaspers called the axial age, China, India, and the West, are sufficient to confront problems that seem quite new, not least because of their global dimension. It is clear, at any rate, that those traditions inspired informal education and social practices, moral ideals, and institutional frameworks long before the establishment of modern education systems formally expanded literacy and access to culture among such a diverse array of people. Although civilizations as such do not engage in dialogue of any kind, they contribute quite a bit to the real dialogues that take place between individuals, insofar as they lend their communicative and cultural resources to pre-existing institutional context. Indeed, speaking of civilizations is a way of emphasizing one aspect of the cultural resources involved in any such dialogue, namely its universal resonance. Marcel Mauss defined civilizations as social phenomena that are not strictly linked to a specific social organism, in that they supersede national borders or the history of a single society. For this reason, he regarded civilizations as cultural phenomena that are able to travel. Focusing on culture allows us to regard civilizations in terms of what Max Weber defined as ideal types. Cultural formations articulated around certain features or social regularities extracted from a historical experience, which serves the purpose of organizing meaningful social experience, even if they lack exact correspondence in reality. East and West would be such ideal types, in that they are useful for navigating through cultural history and for achieving some provisional understanding of cultural change and of what it takes to develop a dialogically born culture. Indeed, as Theodore de Bary noted in a book entitled The Great Civilized Conversation, for centuries, a conversation has been going on both Asia and the West about the values that could sustain a human community. But there has been only limited exchange between the two conversations. In his view, however, the challenges of the contemporary world are such that the civilizing process can only be sustained through an education that includes, at least in part, sharing in the traditional curricula developed on both sides, based on classics now recognized not only as enduring, but as world-class, end quote. Educational programs, such as the Making of the Modern World, which has been in place in the University of California, San Diego, since the 1980s, were meant to contribute to that conversation. According to Richard Madsen, the program emphasized factual knowledge, narrative understanding, and critical understanding, since all faculty share the conviction that in order to understand the present, you have to understand where it came from, and also how living traditions change over time. It benefited from this program, from the various experience in Columbia University, an institution that has a significant tradition of academic exchange with China dating back to John Dewey. As ideal types, East and West are theoretical constructs that are indebted to multiple layers of cultural history. While they retain some reference to changing geopolitical entities, they are not primarily geopolitical categories, but cultural ones, emerging from our need to meaningfully orientate ourselves in the world. This is a metaphor that Kant used to understand what it means to orientate oneself in thinking. Two aspects in Kant's metaphor are especially significant in this context. First, the fact that it's a geographical metaphor. And second, the fact that it entails the feeling of a difference in our own subject. In the sense that in order to orientate oneself, you need to have a feeling of, this is my left hand, this is my right hand. So this is interesting. So we should think why we place ourselves in the East or in the West. According to Emil Durkheim, all these distinctions come from the different affective values that are attributed to spatial region. So in the West, in the history that the West tells about itself, events such as the Persian Wars define a turning point and therefore an affective point because it meant the victory of democracy over autocracy, for instance. Something similar could be said of St. Paul's call to preach in Macedonia instead of Asia, as it marked the entrance of Christianity in Europe in the first place. Other events could be highlighted as particularly significant in articulating the categories of East and West in affective terms. I will skip a reference to Hegel because there is no time for that. But the interesting thing from my perspective is that East and West are part of the way all human beings orientate themselves in the world. And this means that East and West are constitutive parts of an integral human experience. So, East and West are ideal types, but real life is never as consistent as ideal types. For better or worse, cultural traditions are always in the making and are always under threat. But if in the midst of broken cultural traditions and even political conflict, we expect human beings to preserve a basic sense of what is good and valuable, it's only because of the intrinsic affinity of certain values, perhaps especially emphasized in the East or in the West, belong to the human experience as such. No? Just as we have a right hand and a left hand, we have a sensibility for all values, independently of where they come from or where they are more representative. So education needs more than value resonance. We resonate with many values that are particularly clear in the East, and many people in the East resonate with many values that are particularly visible in the West. But education goes beyond that kind of resonance. It requires intellectual and moral work. Throughout history, educators, both in the East and in the West, both in secular and religious contexts, have insisted on the importance not only of reason, but also of habit and virtue. We could mention Aristotle and also, of course, Confucius and many other educators. Dewey, who was considered a modern Confucius, and even in China. So what kind of education would serve to foster a dialogically born culture? In my opinion, this education should arouse a genuine interest in such a dialogue and develop the intellectual and ethical virtues required for that dialogue. Although initial interest may be simply theoretical or pragmatic, engaging in real dialogue immediately places us in an ethical context that promotes respect and empathy for the other. In the process, we may need to increase our theoretical knowledge of each other's cultural traditions, but more importantly, we must feel the need to contribute our own cultural resources to our shared goal. And I'm going to finish here, but I think that one important shared goal for both the East and the West is recalling that there is a North and a South. And beyond East and West, we need to be all concerned with the South. Of course, what it means, it depends on many circumstances, but the South probably is the focus that we need in order to engage in a dialogue, fruitful dialogue between the East and the West.